Well, for more on the battle in and over Syria, I'm now joined by Pierre Guerlain, a professor of political science at Paris West University Nanterre La Défense. Well, as we just heard there from our correspondent a little earlier, Marina Portnas, she says that Western and Arab diplomats at the UN are currently working to change Russia's staunch opposition to a draft resolution which blames just President Bashar al-Assad for the bloodshed. What are their chances of success?
Well, it's difficult to gauge now, but, the geopolitical game is played at two levels. The ethical level, and clearly the Assad regime is murderous. It's time for it to go. So from this point of view, the Moroccan plan is quite adapted to the situation. But then the geopolitical game is also a game of influence in a key region. So on the one hand, you have the West supporting the rebels in Russia. They want the regime down. They want to eliminate the only ally of Iran. And then Russia is supporting the regime in Syria for the same geopolitical reasons. That is, it needs an ally in the region. And the ethical dispute refers to something which is real, an ugly regime which has to go. But beyond this, there's also the geopolitical aims, and they are quite different.
In what way are they different then?
Well, geopolitically, the West wants to have influence in Syria, so Iran is deprived of its one ally in the region, and Russia is also deprived of its one ally in the region. That's the geopolitical aim. And at the same time, there's a real disastrous humanitarian situation. But of course, humanitarian situations are always used in order to achieve geopolitical aims. So the West is arming the rebels, Russia is arming the government in Syria. It's very close to a war by proxy, as happened during the Cold War.
Let me just quickly ask you, the UN resolution implies that foreign intervention could ensue. Russia insists that intervention will spark civil war. Some would say the civil war's already started, hasn't it, there?
Well, the civil war has started, but if the resolution were like the Libya resolution, then it would be, of course, a boulevard, it would be an avenue for NATO to intervene with the cover of the UN. And then what happens afterwards is that NATO takes side in a civil war. Russia wants to prevent it for geopolitical reasons, and the West claims it wants to do it for humanitarian reasons. The humanitarian crisis is real, but the geopolitical stakes are slightly at odds with this political situation.
You're talking about the West taking sides there. We know that Western countries have been accused of just blaming the Assad regime for the Syrian crisis and nobody else, ignoring the role of the armed opposition.
Well, the Assad regime is clearly responsible for many murders, but if you give arms to the other side, instead of trying to negotiate at the UN with the Arab League in order to achieve a peaceful solution, which probably would include the collapse of the Assad regime, because the solution in Syria, I think, cannot be achieved without Assad leaving power. But it can be achieved either through military force of the Libyan type of intervention, and that is a disaster, and then we don't talk about the consequences of the disaster, or it can be achieved through negotiation, and that would be negotiation at the UN with the Arab League on the basis maybe of the Moroccan plan, but peacefully, not with weapons. And
do you think that negotiation really is likely? Russia's clearly pushing for that very hard, but obviously meeting a lot of resistance from the West and other Arab countries. Do you think really there is a chance, or is it too late now for successful negotiations?
Well, if the Syrian opposition, the rebels, feel they can win without negotiations, there would be no negotiations. But if it's a stalemate, and the two sides realize that it's a stalemate, maybe there's a chance for negotiations. But, you have a murderous leader, it should be out of the way. But the best way to get him out of the way is peacefully and not by armed intervention, because armed intervention creates more problems. And if you look at Libya, there are many problems that are not reported about in the mainstream press in the West. But the intervention was not a total success, to say the least. So the regime has to go, but I think it should come through negotiations.
Pierre Guerlain, Professor of Political Science at Paris West University Nanterre La Défense, thank you very much indeed for
your welcome.